of November. So let's unveil the rankings exclusively. The All-State College Football Playoff Top 25. At number 25, the only team in the country that hasn't trailed for 1 second, the Black Knights of the Hudson Army, led by Jeff Monken. Bryson Daly, hoping he'll be back soon. Their quarterback, they are 8-0 and number 25. Just ahead of the Cadets at number 24. A little bit of a surprise. Missouri hasn't looked great here so far.
And people have been beating up the AP for having Missouri in. Missouri beat Vanderbilt, who has some pretty good wins on their resume. So while I don't think Missouri's playing or trending in the right direction, it's understandable that they start at 6-2 with a decent win in the top 25.
At number 23, just ahead of Eli Drinkwitz's Tigers. Speaking of teams trending in the wrong direction after Saturday night, Clemson, Dabo Swinney had problems at the poll today. His son, with the same first name, had already voted. Had to give Dabo a paper ballot. Apparently, the ballot's enough. Got to Clemson at number 23. Number 22, Louisville, who just put it on Clemson on Saturday night. And those 3 losses for the Cardinals, all against good teams and all competitive games. They lost to
ranked 25 teams.
Yeah, they lost to Miami, they lost to SMU, and they lost to Notre Dame. And all of them were competitive games. So Jeff Brom's team at number 22. At 21, Washington State. Now, Herb Street has asked this a couple of times on game day. Washington State doesn't have a conference right now. They can't get an automatic bid into the playoff. In order to get into the field, Washington will have to move into at least the top 12, maybe the top 11, depending on where that 5th conference champion is ranked at the end. But Wazoo with a great place at number 21. How about Colorado? 6-2, huge game coming up against Texas Tech on Saturday.
What a weekend Colorado had, being off and then sitting back and watching Iowa State lose and Kansas State lose. Great weekend for Colorado because now they're sitting in a place that if they can win out with a very easy schedule, they got a chance to get in.
Except for maybe Saturday when the tortillas will be flying in Lubbock.
You just did that to Texas A&M and South Carolina, and you took them down. Now you're taking down Colorado.
Just pointing it out.
Yeah,
pointing it out.
There was no picnic playing the Red Raiders.
It's not, but they can't stop much most of the time, although they were better on Saturday. I mean, kind of like Colorado in that game. Kansas State, a tough loss to Houston. It really hurt the Wildcats there at number 19, just ahead of K-State at 18. The Pittsburgh Panthers, they got clobbered by SMU on Saturday night, their first loss of the season. Pittsburgh has been opportunistic, and then early in the season, the offense was humming. Offense has sputtered a little bit of late. Panthers still in the mix with only 1 loss and 1 loss in ACC play. Iowa State just suffered its first loss at the hands of Texas Tech in Ames last Saturday. Matt Campbell's team is number 17 at 7-1 and still in the mix in a wide open Big 12. Hotty toddy, Ole Miss is 16. Ole Miss is now in a place in the season where everything's an elimination game. And it starts Saturday afternoon at home against Georgia. If Ole Miss loses, virtually no shot of making the 12-team field.
Based on eye test and talent, Ole Miss is among the best teams in college football. Now, have they shot themselves in the foot? Yes, twice against both Kentucky and obviously on the road at LSU, but this is a very dangerous team, and this is one of those teams we talked about. 12 feels like a lot, but man, Ole Miss, they're one of those teams that don't have the margins to get back into it.
I think they lost in overtime to LSU and didn't trail until the game-winning touchdown at the end, and that was the slightest margin of difference, and LSU is in the same boat as Ole Miss. Everything's an elimination game. They have one against Alabama coming up on Saturday night.
Yeah, LSU only has 1 conference loss, and everything is in front of them. You beat Alabama. They got 4 conference games left. Alabama, Vanderbilt, Oklahoma, and Florida. They win those games, they'll have an opportunity to play for an SEC championship.
You know, that's a great point, too, because LSU feels like only 1 more loss would do them in. Depending on what else happens, if they win a tiebreaker, get into the SEC championship game. We've talked a lot about hope. There are 2 paths of hope. There's getting into the top 12, and then there's also working your way into your conference championship game and getting an automatic bid. Now, we're going to do this differently this year. Once we get to this point in the rankings, we're going to show you the first and second teams out and then where they would go on the bracket. Texas A&M is number 14, and the Aggies, after the loss to South Carolina, they are the second team out, and the committee has them ranked 14. So the first team out of the field is SMU from the ACC.
All I'm saying is, does that mean Indiana is not disrespected in this. They are now on this bracket, so they are not disrespected. But Boog, to your point.
What if they're not in the top 25?
Why is Army not having the same argument? Why is Army doesn't feel disrespected? They're coming in at 25, and they look, but they look really good too. And Indiana's strength of schedule is terrible. But go ahead, Rece.
It is, but I would still say that even Indiana's schedule, they've played some middling teams in the Big Ten, which is a higher level of competition.
Good playing nobody.
They look great. The higher level of competition than Army has faced to this point.
I don't like
Let's get this up. Now, this is really important, guys, because the selection committee has Boise State ranked 12th. This would make Boise State, if they project and win the Mountain West, the 5th highest ranked conference champion. Now, they slot into the 12th because they're ranked 12. If they happen to get ranked higher by the end, then they will be seeded higher. But for the moment, they are seeded 12th. Who's seeded 11th? Who is number 11 in the rankings? Alabama. Elimination game for the Crimson Tide. One would think already with 2 conference losses against LSU Saturday night. Now, number 10. The Fighting Irish of Notre Dame. Now, I brought up in the open one of the more confounding cases because Notre Dame had the great win at A&M. They also had the worst loss on the board, losing at home to Northern Illinois.
They have a win against Navy, which is a good win, even though Navy just dropped another one this weekend. And they have Army coming up, the team I just mentioned, being disrespected by Booger in Indiana.
The Louisville win also very good for
That's a great point, Greg. They've beaten Louisville, and who would have thought that they would need something to offset having to play Florida State on Saturday. Right. And Florida State at 1-8. Number 9 in the rankings, BYU. Now, this is where you have to follow along. They're ranked 9th, but because BYU is leading the Big 12, if it were to end this way, the Cougars, if they win that conference, they would go into the 4 seed, get a bye into the quarterfinals because they would be the 4th highest ranked conference champion.
And this one to me feels underrated. I mean, I look at BYU with a 9 next to their name, undefeated with significant win over number 13 SMU, pounded Kansas State by nearly 30 points, turned them over a bunch in that game. I know they've been outgained in a few different games. I understand that, but I look at game control, undefeated, strength of record. They check a lot of boxes. So at 9, that just feels painfully low with what BYU's accomplished.
They have the game with Utah coming up this weekend on the road, the rivalry game, and ranked just ahead of BYU, the Indiana Hoosiers. Now ranked 8th, but because BYU pushes everybody down a slot, that would give Indiana a road game to start the playoff at seeded 9th.
Well, this goes to show you that Indiana and the committee really values eye test, because if you're going based exclusively on how teams execute on both sides of the ball, Indiana is up there closer to Oregon than they are to being outside the college football playoff conversation. Now, they're not the brand name, and yes, so far up to this point, they have a strength of schedule that's triple dig. It's not great, but with how they've played and the level in which they've executed at, I think they're appropriately ranked at 8th with the arrow pointing up, given some of the big hurdles they have coming up against Michigan and at Ohio State.
They're like 10-58 all time against Michigan. Wonder, this will be the first test about looking at the helmet across the way and thinking, you know, they always beat us. And then the challenge at Ohio State. Indiana's remaining schedule is in the top 15 in the country, so they'll have their opportunities to prove themselves. Ranked number 7, Tennessee. What a first-round game that would be, huh? In Neyland Stadium.
Take the over.
Here comes Signetti and the Hoosiers into Knoxville. See,
you like the over. I might like the under.
I like the over.
The defense.
Indiana has been scoring a lot of points, and Tennessee will have to stay with them. Take the over.
Tennessee's got an argument to make right here, though. I mean, they're sitting at 8. I understand that. Or 7, excuse me. I understand that. But there's an argument to be made that their resume is actually better than several other one-loss teams that are likely going to be in front of them, like Texas and Penn State.
And Greg, I gave you Herbie's line earlier, and you're totally blown right past it. It matters. First ranking.
You tried to say this last year, and we sat here on selection day, and
it's the first ranking, but it's a glimpse inside what the committee is thinking. And I think the committee is holding the Arkansas loss against Tennessee.
Just win.
And you know what? I think you're right. And also Alabama, that's their biggest win. Alabama's not, they're in the field. That's a great win. I'm not trying to diminish it, but Alabama's not playing its best at the moment.
But they're inside. Just win. That's it.
Number 6, and Tennessee, who also with an opportunity against Georgia and could get to the SEC championship game. Going to be a little bit tougher for Penn State to get into the Big Ten championship game, one would think, after losing to Ohio State. They don't play Oregon, but Penn State, Notre Dame, that would be fun in Happy Valley. Texas is number 5. Alabama and Texas don't play in the regular season as it stacks up right now. Crimson Tide would go to Austin.
And Texas is interesting to me because when you look at their resume and who they played, on the road at Michigan. Michigan at the time in the AP was number 10. The other one they have is Oklahoma. At the time, Oklahoma was 18. Both of those teams, depending upon how the committee looked at those teams at the time, aren't very good football teams right now. That seems high with their resume so far.
Maybe, but I'm good with Texas at 5. Yeah. I think it's deserved. I mean, you brought it up earlier, Joey, when we were talking before the show. After you played Georgia, you're beat up.
Yeah.
And you go into Vanderbilt, they got the win.
They haven't beat anybody, though.
Fair enough.
Well, who have they beat?
No, it's fair. It's a fair point. All right, number 4. The Miami Hurricanes leading the ACC. They have snatched victory from the jaws of defeat on multiple occasions. They are ranked 4. They would be seeded 3rd.
And I think when you look at Miami, I think Cam Ward is going to win the Heisman Trophy. He's been that good throughout this college football season, but he has to be because he's got to make up for some of the deficiencies on this team. Defensively, I still have questions about them. Running the football, can they do it consistently? But Cam Ward covers up for a multitude of sins for that team, and I would not want to face him because he's been the best quarterback in the country at making plays down the stretch for his team.
How about last year? I think they were 1-4 in one-possession games.
Yes.
This year they've won 3 of them, and Duke Saturday wasn't a one-possession game, but it was a 1-point game in the 4th quarter before.
Right. At a certain point.
But yeah, before here's Miami's whole philosophy. We have Cam Ward, and you don't.
Yep. Yes.
And
it works.
It has worked perfectly. Ranked number 3. The Georgia Bulldogs. So Georgia is behind the 2 Big Ten teams. Georgia would be seeded 2nd as the leaders in the SEC if they wind up there and ultimately win the conference. Big game at Ole Miss. Big game coming at home against Tennessee after that. And then the top 2 teams, it's pretty easy. Ohio State is number 2. They would host Boise State to start. Again, this is worth pointing out. Ohio State ranked number 2, but because they would not be a conference champion in this projection, can't be seated in the top 4, that would push them down to the spot that Joey said a couple of weeks ago that would be coveted. And, of course, the number 1 team in the land, the team that beat Ohio State by a single point, the Oregon Ducks. So